Welcome to the Adventures of Alice and Bob, the podcast where we get root access to the people shaping the world of cybersecurity today to find out about their journey, their career, the events that have shaped that, and maybe those things that still keep them up at night. Today's guest started his career as a special operations communicator, the electronics guy for a Tier 1 team's downrange. After pivoting into security, he spent his time fighting nation states for the US military. After leaving the military, he went on to spend nearly 3 years at Deloitte on their Global Red Team, then another 3 years as Director of Offensive Security at Echelon Risk and Cyber, and built out US operations from scratch for UK-based CovertSwarm, before co-founding his own company, Emulated Criminals, where he now serves as CEO. In today's episode, we're going to find out about David and how he became known as Cyber Idiot, a mob boss, and APT Big Daddy. So David, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, man. Super excited to be here.
So let's jump back right to the beginning. So before you joined the military, what were you like as a kid? What kind of things were you into? What set you on the path of electronics and computers?
That's a great question. Because when you look at it, I was a nightmare, right? Like looking back, I probably wasn't the best kid in the world, especially around high school. But later in life, learned that was more of a byproduct of undiagnosed ADHD. I think a lot of us kind of started to realize that later in life. But you know, I was always one of those kind of creative kids that just wanted to explore through, we'll call it like backyard science, right? Like you think it sounds cool, and then you go and do it, and you're like, wow, that was really dumb. But I would say even as a young kid, still really into computers. My father was in IT, so it made a very easy entry into the realm of things. But I didn't necessarily think I wanted to do anything with computers moving forward in my adult life. But you know, here we are, God, 2026. I can't even remember how old I am at this point. 20 something years later, and I'm like working in security, doing really cool hackery stuff.
Fantastic. And what led you into a military career from kind of the backyard scientist, exploring lots of different things, parents in IT, how did that become a journey into the military?
Truthfully, desperation. Yeah. So it's not like I had like some unfound patriotism that you hear a lot of times around the military, or like, in impoverished zones where that's the only way out. But I was a dummy in high school for sure. My dad used to say you could play hard now, or you could play now, work harder later, or you can work now and play harder later. And I chose the former option. So when I got out of high school, I graduated with a 2.0. I was definitely not getting into a university anywhere. Most of them thought I was kind of a dumb kid. Truthfully, probably was. And I wasn't really doing well in community college or anything like that. Working at Starbucks, I knew I didn't want to work retail or some lower end job on the totem pole. It just didn't sit well with me. It didn't keep things fresh and keep me interested. So I figured the military could be a good option for A, discipline, teach me how to actually pay attention to something, and B, get me into a role that would be at least entertaining. We don't usually talk about like military jobs being entertaining, but there is a certain level of adrenaline that gets built from certain roles that is quite addicting.
Yeah, absolutely. I know a lot of the people we talked to in the podcast, kind of outside of the military and cyber in general, there's a thing that nobody quite wants to say out loud, but it's very exciting when shit goes sideways, when things go wrong, like responding to that, having to think on your feet and deal with things. And I'm assuming like you saw those opportunities in the military for, that's very much, you could be put into a situation and have to just adapt and kind of embrace the chaos.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a lot of chaos, especially when I moved over to special operations. It's not like you have a standard operating plan for every single thing. You may, but it's not always going to be followed. There are exceptions to the rule, and everything ends up becoming chaotic. And how do you improvise? How do you improve? How do you adapt? And how do you overcome it? Right? Like the Marines like to say. But it is one of those careers where it's beyond just the career. It's beyond just the job. The people that you're working with, you create such a trauma bond with everyone that the teams that you make throughout your career are just people you hang out with for the rest of your life. I live halfway across the US from one of my best friends, and I still talk to him nearly every other day. Sometimes it's the ADHD and I forget he exists, but it is what it is. We still kind of, we still keep up and we still treat each other as if we saw each other yesterday.
And did you find, because people often think of military and very rigid structures and that kind of thing, did you find that was something that allowed you to focus more and get things done, or was that something you really struggled with?
No, actually, oddly enough, you would expect someone with like the inability to pay attention continuously as being like the worst environment, being told what to do and all those items that come along with it. But at the end of the day, it was so nice because I didn't have to worry about what I was supposed to do. I could zone out and do the tasks, right? Like, I'm not saying that every task was easy and simple and drone like, but I knew where I needed to be. I needed to be there at a certain time. I knew what we were going to be doing. It's like I didn't have to worry about, oh, do I need to backwards plan? My favorite and most hated thing about the military is like you need to be 15 minutes early to the 15-minute early briefing, right? Like you show up 15 minutes to the 15 minutes. And that seems really dumb to most people. And truthfully, it is quite dumb if you are any bit good at managing time. But for someone like me, I used to show up to the airport 4 hours in advance because I was afraid of not getting through TSA, and it's like, it never took more than 35 minutes to get through the line, but I'm still, I got to be there so early because I was afraid of missing those deadlines. So like time management wise, it made life a lot easier. Now you do a lot of dumb things, right? Like I painted rocks for a general once. We painted them green. No idea why they thought it was a good idea, but they were like, hey, we need to go paint these rocks green because the general's coming. I'm like, what? Okay. That's what we're doing. I can't think of a better like phrase of it, but in the military we call them fuck games, right? Like, excuse the French, but like that's pretty much what you were doing. So some days you were doing fun stuff, other days you were doing that.
Yeah. I know a lot of ex-service people who said, there was never such thing as like downtime. You always had to be doing something, and that could be you could be sweeping a clean floor, or you could be, in your example, painting rocks green. It was about doing something, especially when the top brass walked through. You needed to be busy and doing something.
Yeah, most people don't understand busy work.
Yeah. So what was your role? So you mentioned there the special operations team. Your role was as a communicator there, the electronic specialist. What was involved in that role?
Yeah, so that one was a really cool job. See, because I was give a little backstory. Like I didn't want to keep doing what I was doing at the time. When I joined the military, I wanted to be either EOD or what's called or EOD being explosive ordnance disposal, or attack P, which is like the air controllers for combat operations. But I was a stick. Like I was 120 pounds, right? I'm not a tall person. So like military looked at it and they were like, you need a waiver. You're not getting that. So they gave me IT, which was on the list. I was like, all right, I'll take it. But then I find out about this unit that is the communications unit for JSOC. That's unclassified now. I had to think about that for a second. But so I get into this unit. I really don't know what I'm going to do, right? I just know they're the commo dudes for the cool guys. I'm like, that sounds cool. I want to do that. Basically, the way that the unit was structured when I had come in was to be the sole communication individual for the teams. So you deploy forward with the teams and you're doing radio, SATCOM, servers, IT, whatever. If it's got a analog to digital in some form or fashion, you're responsible for it. And so you go through like the 6-month selection course, which is like a really, really long interview where you learn everything from the combat operations down to the how to do radio, how to troubleshoot radio, how to do SATCOM, how to troubleshoot SATCOM, how to do servers, how to troubleshoot, the whole shebang of it. And that was a blast. Honestly, it was a ton of fun because not only from the novelty of the situation where it's like you don't really know what you're getting into, but just the fact that like most of the problem sets that you get put in front of you have nothing to do with communications. right? Like we've done a really good job as an industry building up robust mediums to deliver communication across the board. So a lot of times you'd get like, "Hey, can you help us with the electricity inside this server room?" You're like, "Oh, okay, fine. I guess I'll do that." "Hey, can you set up the camera system for this camp?" "Okay, sure, I'll do that." "Can you fix this microwave?" Like, I don't know how, but we'll Google it. So, it was a lot of cool stuff like that. I had a ton of fun doing it. Met a lot of great people, went to a lot of really weird places that you normally wouldn't go to. But, I definitely wouldn't go back in vacation, but if they were safer, 100% would. Some very beautiful places out there that I would have never seen otherwise.
And I believe within like special operations teams, it's a bit more interesting because they have a greater degree of freedom in the way they operate, the kit selection, the tools. So you must have been exposed to kind of a wide variety of tools and technologies, and like you said, from fixing microwaves to dealing with comms and surveillance.
Yeah, you definitely learn that the rules don't apply to everyone, right? And that sounds kind of bad to say out loud, but it's the truth of war, right? In especially in an engagement in which we're not truly at war, and a lot of countries in NATO felt that they could skirt the rules of war in agreements with the UN. Not saying like war crimes or anything of that sense, just more so like what is normally accepted, what we would call like a UN combat norm. Um, so you do meet a lot of individuals that you normally would not get to converse with. Got to work with like SAS teams in a few deployments, and that was probably the funniest because I feel like they give less cares about anything else, than what the U.S. did at the time. But yeah, I like to say you never underestimate the military's ability to kill people. They have technology out there that just like, oh, neat. This feels like Call of Duty, but I never got to like use that equipment. That wasn't my job, right? I was the guy in the van making sure the IT stuff worked. But getting that exposure and seeing what was possible kind of opens your mind to a lot of creative solutions.
Yeah, and I believe when you transitioned into kind of the cyber aspect there and the training course there, that was following a pitch. There was a particular sergeant major who seems to have played a bit quite an influence in your career, and he has quite a way with words for giving you career pitches. So what was his pitch from moving from comms into kind of cyber offensive capabilities?
Yeah, because I didn't know anything about cybersecurity, right? Coming into it, I was like, it sounded cool. Hacking sounds cool, but I only ever seen it in like TV and movies. I didn't know what the reality was. So, he had mentioned like, "Hey, man, you can move to cyber." That was the troop's name at the time, and it's like, "What's that?" And he's, "I don't know, but it's not fucking defense." Like word for word, that's what he said. And I went, "That sounds cool. Yeah, sure, let's do it. All right." Um, and like when I went to assess for that, because even when you get into these realms of units, um, every unit, even down to like the troops, the individual mission sets within the unit, there's selection for those. So you may make it through selection, but then you got to go through another set of selection. So the prelim to even get into that cyber selection was you had to take a test, and it was probably the hardest test I've ever taken. I think I got like a 18 or 20 on it out of 100. And I was like, "Oh, I'm not getting selected. No way." And they're like, "Congrats, you passed." I'm, "Oh, okay, cool." Uh, but then, they shove you down into a dark room in a basement of this building and tell you to learn Linux before the start of the class. And you're sitting there trying to figure out how to do, uh, not firewall D, what was the other one? IP tables and how to do routes and where things log and learning the ins and outs of the Linux OS. For a guy who has only really operated under Windows or UI, it was very different, put it that way. But it was a ton of fun. I loved it. It was a good time.
And I believe that program had been running for about 15 years, but it hadn't had many graduates out of it. Like you say, it was a very rigorous selection process and a very tough course. So I believe you were graduated number about 89 out of, the
Yeah, so that
entire.
was my roster number, which is like what they assign to you when you graduate. Um, yeah, I want to say that it sounds about right. I don't know for sure because like the unit has, and like in everything soft, right? Everything evolves over time. So what was originally the intention changes into a new intention, changes into a new mission set, and really comes down to like the individual combatant commanders or the unit commanders to determine where they fit in the overall mission set. But yeah, I mean that course has been around a long time. Um, yeah, and I was only 89, so I know that when they had mentioned it back in the day, it was like, "Oh, yeah, this has been around for 15 years." I'm like, "Wait, I'm only 89? It's kinda weird."
And I'm assuming that not just you weren't just exposed to, hey, here's a command line, here's a Linux operating system, here's IP tables, right? There's some fantastic tooling and kind of classified uh, capabilities that you'll have also been exposed to. So, kind of how eye opening was that experience, and what did you learn about the technology? Maybe you thought you understood the technology landscape reasonably well. How did it change your perspective?
So, I think it really opened up the concept that IT is a creative field, right? A lot of people look at IT as being like this very numbers based. I mean, we do use base 10 for the majority of our programming, but like to get us to this point, it's all been creativity and a lot of tooling, especially at like the upper echelons of, we'll call it sophisticated threat actors, right? With like nation states, it's all creative usage of the OS or the hardware in which we never thought was possible or intended. So like going through that course, I thought, oh yeah, this seems. It's like I guess the best way to put it is like in my mind, I always thought like this is just movie magic. Like, this is very like that's not possible. It's probably more complex than what they're putting out there. But smarter people than me, build these tools out, and next thing you know, you're basically dot slash executing 0 days and living in environments for so long that there's still no reports from any AVs on like those products or tools. So it's like the use cases for them were definitely nuanced to longer espionage. But yeah, it was one of those things. Like when I got out, I never used Metasploit, never used Cobalt Strike, didn't really know what they were. I had heard of Metasploit before, but not Cobalt Strike. I was getting rejected for jobs because uh, nobody thought I had real world experience. I'm like, I'm literally doing this for real, guys. Like, I see what's reality, and like, I can write you the malware, I can write you the scripts, but I don't just because I don't know the C2 device. Now all of a sudden, I'm not as worthy. But the red team gatekeeping has kind of died off since then, thankfully.
Yeah, well, we'll dig into that in a second. I just wanted to get your perspective on kind of having worked in the kind of the military, the nation state end of things, and the civilian sector as well. When people think about threat actors, they often think, they'll just be opportunistic all the time. There's a lot of kind of spray and pray. You mentioned, these malware things eventually get detected. They appear in the AV engines, the virus totals, all these things. But you were talking about things that lay dormant that just don't ever get detected. It's 10, 20, 30 years. What is the kind of the operational tolerance when working as a kind of a nation state level? Because you must have to look at a huge amount of vulnerabilities and techniques and reject many of them for fear that they'll be too noisy, that they'll trip something. You've got to be so stealthy, I imagine.
So so testing is definitely a rigorous um, step in like the development plan as a whole. Though when you look at nation states, you kind of also have to look at like the individual groups in nation states, right? Like, uh, I think a good example of this would be looking at Iran because they're in the news right now, right? There are Iranian nation state threat actors that operate far more like hacktivists than they do espionage actors, right? So it depends on the mission set. And even here in the US, right? I remember when I had first gotten out, it came to light that Cybercom, whenever they would go and attack or DDoS or disrupt somebody, every packet said, "This is the U.S. Department of Defense Command. We are DDoSing you." Right? Like the attribution was 100%. Whereas, like, there are certain mission sets in which attribution cannot come back to the US. And so it is very meticulous, down from like infrastructure planning up to the actual execution of the malware or exploit itself. So like when we do testing in those realms, the testing environments isn't like a VM server or an ESXi server with like hundreds and hundreds of different systems. Like those exist, but the testing environments are really just like server rooms full of just computers and different hardware. Because a rootkit for a Intel processor may work on this particular uh, model number, but not the next model number. And the next model number may create a blue screen. And if that blue screen occurs, then that's a artifact in which may alert an individual. Now, like I would say most people that are non-technical aren't going to be like, oh, snaps, a blue screen, I'm being hacked, right? But there are certain levels of acceptance in which the governments can really accept as far as an artifact that can be seen. So yeah, there were times where tools would get rejected because, hey, this made the screen flash. Like, okay, did it alert anything? No, it just made it flash for like a millisecond. All right, we can't use it. Right, go back to the dev and send it up. But it is very much a meticulous testing program to ensure that there are no artifacts, especially in that like that realm of high and deep intelligence value, right? High value and deep. What is the word in English? Can't think of it. It'll come to me in like 20 minutes. I'll scream it out, and you'll be like, "Oh, we'll edit that back in." Yeah, but it's just like this deep value to the community on a find, fix, locate scale. Because a lot of the times when you're, at least when I was in, right, we weren't bridging the gap to kinetic. That's not necessarily the case today. All right, we've already seen in the news that's happening a lot more. But in theory, we could have.
Let's talk about that problem. So you mentioned that you're in this environment. There was a very high level of quality control, making sure everything was very precise and controlled. And then you leave the military. Your old sergeant major comes back again to pitch you, "Hey, want to break into companies and not go to jail?"
Different one, yeah.
Different
No,
one?
different one, yeah, from a different tier 1 unit. Very, very cool dude. But yeah, I didn't know what I was gonna do when I got out. I did y You know, I think you and I are at the age, where you watch Discovery Channel, and it actually had, like, good programming. There was an old show on it called To Catch a Thief. Yeah, great show. As a kid, I always thought that would be cool, right? Like, the mischief-minded kind of person. But I didn't know that existed in today's world. And so when I got out, I was thinking, all right, do I go back to government as a civilian? Do I go agency? Do I go law enforcement? Do I just go criminal? Right? Like, what do I do? And then, this guy's telling me all about like, oh, hey, by the way, like this is where you can go and work. This is what red teaming is. Instantly sold. Like the phrase, do you want to go break into companies and not go to jail? Like, sure, yeah, who don't? So, so it was interesting because Deloitte was one of the few companies in which I was told right off the bat, I'm not getting in because I don't have a degree. I had my OSCP, but it's really all I had to my name. So I remember the recruiters like, there's no way you're getting selected. It's like, oh, cool. Right. And it's like being gate kept from like other big companies at that time. Uh, I wasn't feeling too confident, but somehow got the job, and then ran off the deep end and started to hack companies instead.
I mean, the kind of the thing with where you come from, right? That very high level of quality, precision, probably knowing all these covert techniques that just simply the people interviewing you might not have been aware of or might have assumed didn't exist just because they hadn't been published in a blog somewhere, which was obviously very deliberate from the US military standpoint. That must have been incredibly frustrating to go, I know this stuff. I can't always talk about what I've done. I can't talk about the tools I've used. But seriously, if you think Metasploit's cool, you should have seen what I could do over there. Like, how did you deal with that challenge there?
I think back in the day, I really didn't understand how to navigate the line, right? Like when you are in that environment for several years, you they call it the silent professional, right? Like at this point, I'm basically just like any other SEAL who writes a book. Like I just keep chatting about it, and I'll probably get shit about this from the boys and whatnot. But I didn't know how to talk about that experience in a way that made sense to those who have never experienced it. Right. And I think like that's a big problem a lot in tech in general, where a lot of people just don't understand how to colloquially explain technical situations in a manner that anyone can explain or understand. But when I was going through it, it's just like, am I dumb? Am I are we really that bad? Were we nothing but script kiddies? Like I feel like the people that I worked with were probably some of the smartest people that I know. Like, there was a guy we used to pay a ton of money to that just wrote 0 days on request. Be like, hey man, we need a 0 day. And it was like, got you. 2 weeks later, coming out with some random 0 day, and you're like, how? You know? So it's like you meet all these wonderfully brilliant people who just followed the money at that point, to be honest. But it's like when you get out and everyone's like, yeah, you don't know shit. It's like, wait, I don't, do I not know anything? Um, Come to find out, once I got into the actual work, that most people in this job truly just don't understand the breadth in which um, what is possible within cyber, especially within like hacking, espionage, or offensive cyber attacks.
Yeah. In fact, a good example of that is ICMP. So talk to us about
Yes.
how you had to debate, what ICMP is used for.
Yeah. The funny thing is, if you ever read the IEEE definition, it's a layer 4 protocol. If you're familiar with the OSI model, so data is possible. It was meant to be a troubleshooting tool for network engineers, and I think many network engineers will look at this, this conversation and go, "Yeah, no shit." But for many IT people, they don't realize that. They think ICMP is a packet through destination testing tool, right? They don't open up Nmap and they don't see like when Windows sends a packet, it's 32 bytes because it sends the header information plus the ABCs, right? Like nobody ever looks at that level. So like when I was still in the military, I was at a training course to evaluate a different type of course other than SANS or OSCP, something that could give us some knowledge into like the civilian side of the industry to see if maybe we're not doing something or we're not learning that we could be implementing. Uh, and a lot of the conversation for the physical aspects of red teaming, like the breaking and entering aspects, which didn't correlate to me later in life. Now that I'm thinking back at it, like that was 100% a record team course. It's like, oh, a lot of ingenuity, like using a credit card to open up a door, to shim a door, is because you're taking the latch. Like, all right, yeah, that's pretty simple and it's corporeal. There's instant feedback, but whenever it came down to cyber, it was like, these are the hard set limits. And I got in this argument with a guy who was like, you can hide data in literally anything. Like the truth is just because it's implemented in a fashion doesn't mean you have to follow it. A driver is well, back in the day, a driver was something that you could just install as long as you had admin privileges. Now it's a little bit harder, right? We made the kernel a little bit more safer, thankfully. But back then, it's like I don't get why you guys aren't being ingenious about or creative about this. Like ICMP is the great example. You can shove 65,400 bytes of data into each ICMP packet, right? And think about like you could exfil based on that. You could infill information based on that. You just have to reconstruct the data and how you want to use it. But like ultimately, it's has the same packet limitations as any other packet that's out there. But in this case, ICMP is a organic protocol that is everywhere. So you can mess with it. This guy didn't believe me for no matter what I said to him. I tried to even show it to him, but it's like some people are just stubborn in their ways and they didn't want to go back. But it is one of those things that now I look back and it's like people are starting to write articles on LinkedIn. And they'll be like, "Oh, did you know you could do this with ICMP?" It's like, yeah, yeah, this has been around for a while, guys. Like, why are we just now figuring this about this now? So, I mean, but it's ICMP is only one small example, and it's probably the easy example, right? Like, you don't have to follow the TCP/IP format. You can add to the TCP/IP format. You can modify drivers. Like, as long as they can go over the digital medium between one device to another, then that's all you need.
It's interesting how those blind spots form in organizations because they just think, like you say, that there's hard and set rules to these things. Why would I monitor ICMP traffic? Because that's just used for this. It couldn't possibly be used for anything else. In the same way we've, seen DNS be used as, C2 command and control stuff. There's a really interesting thing. And I'm curious, as you came into the kind of red teaming industry, you're working for Deloitte, so you're getting to work with some big customers there, some big clients, finding your feet. When it comes to like how companies think about threat actors, they think, we've talked about script kiddies, we've got nation states, they talk about all these different extremes and different levels. But actually, when it comes to engaging with a red team, I find a lot of organizations just think of it as a red team. They don't think of aligning that red team to their skill set, their risk profile, their security maturity, any of that kind of thing. So, what did you learn about where red teaming maybe isn't doing what companies think it's doing for them?
So, I have a lot of conversation pieces around like we as an industry in the civilian side for red teaming have absolutely effed it. We have dropped the ball so hard that we've created an unsafe environment for most organizations, and we've played into turn a phrase I like to call the ski mask bias, right? This idea that Hollywood shows us that a bank robbery, is always done with a mask and a ski gun, ski mask and a gun. Oh man, yeah, I need more caffeine. That's what's going on here. So you get these situations and where like you're not getting APT 42 or 1 or Mage Cart or whoever is relevant to that client. You're getting APT Deloitte, EY, Mandiant, so on and so forth. And red teaming as a whole comes from the military back in Vietnam, right? Like the first red team was to teach the US military how to fight the Viet Cong in guerrilla warfare. Because all we had done up to that point was like, World War II style. You had a major force versus major force, and it was very obvious. So it makes sense in cybersecurity where the first responder is a civilian to teach them how they fight, right? But we kind of dropped the ball and said, screw that. We're not going to do the threat intel. We're not going to do the relevant information that would be relevant to you. I'm going to do whatever TTPs are most realistic to me. And if you pass, you pass, right? And this has created like that dynamic where businesses are rotating their vendors, their validation vendors, every year, every other year, because they're not going to get typically the actual relevant threat emulation. They're going to get whatever that individual or that group of individuals that had been assigned to that project, their skill set, which makes a very wide, what is it? Like distance of understanding of where like true risk actually lies and where the practical risk may lie. And really that comes down to us as like consultants, as red teamers, where we've kind of dropped this ball and we've allowed like other big businesses that are more focused on like other ends of making money to write that narrative. And so like when I came into this market, I recognized a lot of times like civilian companies are woefully prepared for most attacks. You may have the best tools in the market, they still have no clue what they're doing, right? And we've already seen that a lot throughout the last, even the last 26 years, just in the 2000s, right? Where some of these cyber attacks are so massive, it's not really affecting the company that much. I mean, it does, maybe 10 to 15 million a breach, or even more in cases, sometimes 100. But the consumer of those products is also being affected. And so like the greater economic damage that's done is far more significant than what we report based on like an individual organization.
Yeah. We've built breach into the kind of cost and operating model. a lot of the time and just assumed it. And I know when it comes to red teaming, one of my favorite things I heard you say was something along the lines of, people think they've done a great job in defending against the red team when it's the equivalent of blowing up the lobby with C4 and then going, hey, we heard that. We noticed something had gone over there, whether it's, that physical example or we've kind of got a lot of people who just come in and they'll throw a very noisy Nmap scan out there. Someone notices it and then you go, great job, guys, you detected the red team. How do you walk a client through when they think they're doing a good job and actually they're just catching the really obvious thing there?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the reasons why I went more to the management route than staying in the technical route was I feel like I do a pretty decent job at translating that risk and translating that conversation so that people have a better time understanding exactly what the problem is. So, like, I liked my management team at Deloitte. I don't agree with everything Deloitte did, which is the reason why I decided to leave. But, when I was building up Echelon, a lot of that conversation around, like, especially red teaming was, okay, so let's look at you as an environment, as not only as a company, but your industry and your operating clients. I don't need to know exactly who, but like, where do they sit? What do they do? Right. And understand the more full picture so that you can get a better understanding of which big game hunters are going to be going after these organizations, or is a nation state even a realistic threat to this environment? A lot of people like to focus on what the news tells them, right? That ski mask bias. And so, hey, I need to be worried about, well, now maybe you do need to be worried about Iran, but, 5, 6 years ago, you didn't need to be worried about Iran if you weren't working with a direct connection to the US government. Like, it just didn't make any sense. So, trying to reshape that conversation away from what do you see on CNN or Fox News into here's the reality of things. You're not a good espionage target. You don't carry any information that I would care about. Like, the only thing that would be beneficial to us as a nation state would be clout. And then we're not chasing that right now. So, it's a lot of trying to reframe their reality the way they perceived it, um, to a way that makes sense from somebody who has actually lived in the environment. And a lot of red teamers, I think, the actual red teamers, not people who do a lot more pen testing, not saying that they aren't capable, but the red teamers, they think the same way, right? They think, if I was a criminal, what would I want to go after? I don't care about domain admin if I can just get to your PII data right here. That's what's going to give me the money. Why go after a enterprise admin? I got your credit cards or I got the banking info. So, like, those individuals are really helping reshape the idea, especially as it become more vocal. We've traditionally not been very vocal, so it's made it pretty difficult to change the status quo. But it is slowly happening. But it's a conversation. It's a sit down, and it's a reality check for a lot of people.
And I can see in what you're sort of talking about there, why the company is called Emulated Criminals. And just give us like a brief explanation of, what it was you set out to do with Emulated Criminals that was different, because clearly you have some takes on the industry where they've screwed up and actually where we need to correct that balance. So what was your approach with Emulated Criminals? What sets that apart?
So I think consulting in cyber is broken. Like, truthfully, I think when you look at cybersecurity, it's the wedding industry of IT. The moment you throw cybersecurity in front of your product tool, it's instantly 100x times more expensive. And to be fair, our resources are more expensive, right? A good qualified individual is usually somewhere in the 120 plus range here in the US. Not where you start, but cyber isn't an entry level job either, unfortunately. So the first thing that we needed to solve, or first thing I wanted to solve, was how do we address the cost issue in a way that makes sense and in a way that resolves the second piece of the problem set, which is testing once a year is not good. It's not going to lead to more mature environments. It's not going to teach you how to prevent an attack or how to respond to an attack. It's a fallacy. It's a lie that you tell yourself and you prepare for. I like to say you don't want the firefighter putting out the fire at your house, and that's his first time holding the hose, right? Like, there's a training aspect to it. This is a continuous element. And the worst part is as cybersecurity professionals, whether you're on the defensive side or the offensive side, if you work in the industry and not in consulting, you're the first responder. It's not the FBI, it's not the cops that show up when you get hacked, it's you, right? And so a lot of these people have no idea what they're supposed to do until it's game day. And then game day happens, they pull out the SOP and they start following through, and then they find out the SOP is broken. They don't know how to walk through or change that. So what we wanted to do was find a way of making this continuous, and we wanted to make it so that it wasn't going to cost an arm and a leg to get a real product. And so the way that our service works is we treat it as if we were real threat actors. There isn't a set timeline. It's a full year. And throughout the year, I mean, we do things that are a little bit more cadenced, like phishing emails, right? Especially if you want to replace your know before with something a little bit more realistic that isn't going to say it's coming from internal or the link is know before, right? Like, that always pisses me off. But like, now you get realistic phishing. And then the upside of that is if your user fails to that, we keep going. They failed the phishing. Here we go. We're going to keep going. How far does that reach us? And we're not going for domain admin every time. We're not going for enterprise admin every time. We're looking for what we call the crown jewels. What is most important to your business? PII, PHI, proprietary data, whatever it may be. And that's what we're going after. And if we reach that point, it's a phone call and a talk, right? But it's a continuous aspect that isn't driven by like a structure of strictness. This is this date to this date. And what we found is that people now know how they're supposed to react. They now know where their issues truly lay, if it's in tooling or if it's in their people or the size of the team or the process, right? Like, they're able to better define where those risks are, and they outpace us. And then in turn, they outpace their threats. They start to get better. So it's like an extension of their team without being a true expense of the team. And you don't have to pay the, 3x employee cost or 4x employee cost, whoever is working on the client at the time, for the service.
I think that's a really refreshing approach. And, I was smiling and nodding along here because you mentioned like the phishing test emails, and organizations pat themselves on the back for passing this. I have a friend who shall remain nameless who recently got an award for his company for successfully avoiding being phished for like 2 years straight. And he has a rule in his Outlook that says if it contains the X phish test header, just send it straight to my junk and report it as phishing. So he's automated the game because it doesn't emulate your company name. He doesn't emulate a threat actor. And this is where, your title that I mentioned earlier of emulated mob boss, it actually really does pay to properly emulate the criminals and not just kind of do the tick box exercise. So I think that's a really interesting approach there. And I know one of the things you're also passionate about is kind of not just using the Cobalt Strike, the off-the-shelf tooling, and actually, you write your own malware, you teach people, you do courses on writing your own malware. When you're doing a real engagement, that's what threat actors do. That's what actual criminal organizations do. So maybe you can talk to us a little bit about what the importance of actually writing your own malware is, doing your own phishing there.
Yeah. So I think a lot of it is mystified. We look at malware as being like this tool that is so complex and so secretive that when it's deployed in our systems, that's the way it evades detection. It's like this super complex thing. Honestly, if you go and look at like half of the PLAs that China's military's deployments of malware, their loaders, it's like simple character replacements, right? Like it is not complex. And so like, especially with teaching, it's teaching creativity in programming. It's using what's natively there in a way that wasn't necessarily intended to be used in this fashion, but if it works, it works. right? And there are plenty of tools out there that create dynamic loaders or compile in a way that maybe obfuscates the binary statically, but they're public. They're paid for tools. And because of that, guarantee you, CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, Trend Micro, McAfee, doesn't matter. They're buying those tools too. And then they're signaturing the pieces of it that may be static, right? Like the reason Metasploit gets caught every single time is the first 4 magic bytes that Metasploit puts in every single shellcode, right? So when threat actors are getting by and they're evading detection, it's not because the tooling itself is not signatured. It's just the way that they get into a trusted zone, whether it's a trusted process or PID or thread. It's just the way that they execute that application. And so, like, I always like to tell a fun story. Is like I used to shove malware, like C2s, like even Metasploit, into applications, into little code caves, because sometimes poor programming occurs at an enterprise level. Even more so now with vibe coding, right? But you have these desktop applications which have just empty space that you can shove a loader into, and there used to be rules in the AVs that would say, hey, if it's this program, we don't scan on execution. It's like, sweet, hell yeah. And we would send those off and, as like fake IT teams. And they'd be like, oh yeah, double click. And now we have access and the user is clicking our binary. We don't even have to use an exploit. It's all social engineering. But yeah, the signature has changed, but the name hasn't. And a lot of times those old methods from AV engines would be like match the name, not the signature, because the signature can change at any point from updating. And we don't want a false alarm on an application. So, it's like with teaching in that realm, it's all about building these unique binaries, which is not unique in the sense of like overly complex, just unique where it's just different. You're doing it a different way. And Windows especially, they give you all the tools. I mean, the Windows API is well documented. And if you don't know, but you think you like, I know I need I need something to allocate memory, right? Of course, we have virtual alloc, and then there's virtual alloc extended. But if you just like look at anything for allocation on Windows 32 API, it'll list all the other functions. And now you're using a completely separate function that was never intended for virtual alloc, but here you go, right? So that's been my mission set with teaching malware. It's mostly to demystify it so people stop looking at it as being this like overly complex thing and start looking at it as what it really is and why like building detection engines for static and dynamic execution doesn't always work and why you need that multi-layer protection.
Absolutely. I used to run a training workshop internally where we got technical people within like SE, sales operations, to build something with Metasploit, build some payloads, obfuscate it. Oh, look, we can throw it into VirusTotal. Some of them don't get it. Some of them do get it. Okay, now let's go and write some very basic Python code, put it in an exe wrapper. Oh, look, it's not detected by anything. No one knows, just because it was unique. It wasn't sophisticated in any way, shape, or form, but it was unique enough that it was bypassing these things. And, again, it's that magic thing. It always comes back to me as the guy, I don't know if you know, Fred Cohen, who kind of coined the term computer virus in about 1982, 83. And then very shortly after wrote a paper basically saying, oh yeah, these things can change infinitely almost. So we'll never be able to detect them all because all you have to do is be unique enough that we've never seen you before. And yet we've kind of, an entire industry has been built since that time to now of detecting all these things. So yeah, absolutely. That defense in depth piece is very important. And actually we should explain here where the APT Big Daddy name comes from, because when you were creating some of these payloads, you used to have a little signature that you put in there.
Yeah, I used to joke a lot. I didn't get medicated until my mid 30s. So when I first got out, still wasn't medicated, and mischief finds its way back into my mind. So a lot of times I'd be taking like Mimikatz payloads or Metasploit payloads, Cobalt Strike payloads, and building some form of obfuscator or some form of loader so that the other teams could go in and put that out there. And I always thought it would be really funny if like a threat actor called themselves APT Big Daddy, because like how full of yourself do you really have to be, right? Like, so I used to sign all of the dev payloads as APT Big Daddy, right? Everything in Mimikatz where Ben's name is littered, it'd be not APT Big Daddy. Unbeknownst to me is, and the rest of the team is they were deploying an AV system in monitor mode. They weren't setting it up and going, but for the longest time, our systems didn't have an AV product like that uh, because we were fighting malware, right? Like that's the red team's job. We'd be very short staffed if we couldn't do the customization aspect of it. So I get into this global call and it's all the CISOs and they're talking about the US member firm and goes, well, we think we may have been breached by a threat actor called APT Big Daddy. We just keep seeing a bunch of like the software that's signed with it. And I was like, oh shit. You know, hey guys, no, that's me. That's your red team. Like, sorry, that's me. And my boss at the time was like, really? APT Big Daddy? And then ever since then, he just kept calling me that and it just kind of stuck around. So hasn't left since. I've tried to like pull my own, you know, my own moniker, but it's like the military. The best monikers aren't ones that you pick. You don't get to pick your call sign in the Air Force, so it's like, all right, I'll stick with it. And it's funny now looking back at it, like the name's hilarious. Like some people get it, some people cringe at it, but like I think it's just funny.
Yeah, I think it's just a great example, and it's one of those little hidden things that unless someone was looking for it or picking up on it, and the fact that someone picked up on it, did some analysis and went, oh yeah, we've decided that's what the actual name of the group is because someone's thrown that very obvious line in there. We're almost running out of time here today, but one thing I did want to talk to you about was the team at Emulated Criminals, because I've heard they're a very conscientious bunch. They're willing to go the extra mile for clients. And in one case, they actually shoveled snow on a client site to help the client out. So can you tell us how altruistic and kind and pure of heart that act actually was?
I mean, that was all an attempt to break in, and they got in. Um, yeah, no, it's social. The thing about crime most people don't realize is it's a subversion of expectation, right? Like if you can subvert expectation, you can do just about any white collar crime and get away with it. It's insane. It's too simple. But the team is wonderful. Like we like to say that they have morals, so that's why they're not in jail, right? But everyone that has worked with us, whether it's current or in the past, has this level of passion towards a realm within offensive cybersecurity that they just want to navigate down, right? You got your phishing experts, your malware experts, your on-net experts, your physical experts. And to be fair, that's how these teams operate. Like Conti, go back and read the Conti leaks, right? Like they had specialized groups. They had an HR team. So when you look at these guys, you don't kind of suspect them as being the criminal bunch or the mischief bunch. But when it's game day, they figure out, they stay creative, and they knock it out of the park. They keep killing it.
And maybe you could just to give us a little bit of insight into what shoveling snow led to, how they use shoveling snow as a social engineering tool.
Yeah. So it's one of those regions in the U.S. that gets a lot of snow. So walk path from the building to the parking lot is all covered over. Their idea, because they didn't see anybody kind of walking in and out. Like it's one of those buildings that kind of has the I guess you could say isolated, right? It's not like a busy area. It's not like I live in Raleigh, North Carolina. We have the Red Hat headquarters downtown. Like you can see those Red Hat guys all over the place and you can see their badge. It's nothing like that there. So they figure, let's go to maintenance. So they walk into maintenance and they go, hey, so we're new here. We haven't got our laptops yet. We're still waiting on IT to give it to us. We're kind of bored. Anything you guys need help with? And the maintenance team was like, hey, you want to shovel snow? So they gave them a golf cart and shovels and salt, and they went out and started shoveling snow. One of them walks back. The other one's still shoveling. One walks back and says, hey, man, do you mind if I run inside? I left my badge in there. And they badge him in. He walks in and starts putting all his implants everywhere. The other one's still shoveling. And then he goes above and beyond and starts salting it. So it was pristine. Like this was It's just like if they were actually getting paid to do this job. Come back in, here's the shovel, get the other guy lets him in. Now both of them are in the building, kind of perusing. Still not legitimate access. So they put their implants down, their physical implants, to give it back to the logical team. The logical team takes it over from there. But they eventually do get caught the next day, but they're not local anymore. They've already stepped off the premise. And the only reason they got caught is because the maintenance team went down to the team that they said they were a part of, and we're like, "Hey man, can you go thank those two dudes?" And they're like, "Who the hell is that?" It was like one of these moments of the way they explained it to us, like when on their side, they were like, "Oh wait, what? Somebody broke in?" So they had the security team, walking through the footage, trying to figure out where these guys went, trying to find the implants. They found a few of the implants, but they didn't find all the implants, so they maintained their access there. But yeah, sometimes it's just a little bit of ingenuity and creativity that gets you into the door. And a lot of people would think like, how is that realistic? But then you gotta look at like how half of these other big breaches are being started. Nobody knows their coworker anymore. So physical is such a hot spot for especially nation states that have really good social engineering programs for their espionage groups. But yeah, that one was a funny one.
Yeah, no, I think it's just a wonderful example of kind of the random act of kindness, the building the empathy, and then exploiting that to get in. And just like you say, emulating a threat actor, exactly what an attacker could and probably would do in those situations. So we're almost out of time here today, but if people want to find out more about you, your work, see what you're building over at Emulated Criminals or over at Cyber Idiots, we haven't had a chance to talk about that yet. What's the best place for people to find out more information?
Yeah, so I mean, the Cyber Idiots, we're still around. We don't really post or do much. We try, but I mean, it's four of us in four different companies, and we just kind of get distracted on everything. But as far as like Emulated Criminals, we have our website you can go check out. We have Playbook, .emulatedcriminals.com too, if you're an offensive practitioner, which is a nice little cheat sheet that you can go and refer to for like quick ideas on TTPs or even programs. We have GitHub. If you ever want to follow me on LinkedIn, I post quite a bit. I post my research on LinkedIn too. I like to do a lot of like weird, unique things into research. I don't like to follow the trends. So, every once in a while I'll pop out with something cool, and at least I think it's cool. And then we'll find out if it is or isn't based on the reaction from people. But I'm an open book. If you ever want to hit me up and just say hi, I'll say hi back. I'm too much of an extrovert. I think my wife hates that, but it is what it is.
Well, we'll make sure to include some links to those things and contact details in the podcast description below. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today on Adventures of Alice and Bob. A big thanks to our guest today, David Schroeder. Really appreciate everything you're doing there and sharing some of the fun and cybersecurity stuff you've been involved in over the years. It's great to see someone who sees the funny side of it, because it's an industry that sometimes we can take a little too seriously, but you've made some fantastic inroads there. Indeed. So, as always, thanks to our super producer, Jesse, and the team at Beyond Trust who make this podcast happen. I'm James Maud, and this has been another adventure of Alice and Bob.
Thank you for listening to the Adventures of Alice and Bob. Do you have any stories from the cybersecurity trenches that would make our listeners' jaws drop? If so, we would love to have you on the podcast. Maybe you faced down a ransomware attack with nothing but coffee and determination, discovered a breach in the most unexpected way, or had a pen test go horribly wrong. Whatever your tale, funny, harrowing, or just plain wild, we want to feature you on the show. To share your cybersecurity war stories, email us at booking@merchantsmedia.com.